If you are thinking about picking one up, I just want to walk you through my experience living with it in a normal house, with normal annoyances like walls, mixed devices, and people trying to do everything at once. The first thing I noticed when I picked each unit up is the size. They are big, not in a subtle way. Each one feels closer to a small game console than a typical router. The shape is simple and clean, and it looks fine sitting out on a shelf, but you do need to plan space for it. It is tall, it has some weight, and it is not something I would want to hide in a crowded cabinet. I tried that early on, and it was a mistake. These units also run warm, not just a little warm, warm enough that I started paying attention to where I placed them. What this system is for, in my view, is the kind of home where you either have a lot of devices, you care about fast local networking, or you want strong Wi-Fi in more than one part of the house without running cables to every corner. It can also make sense if you have a faster internet plan and you actually want to see that speed on wireless devices near the nodes. If your needs are mostly email, web browsing, and a couple of video streams, this is probably more hardware than you need. I used it in a setup with a network-attached storage box, multiple work laptops, phones, streaming devices, and a few smart home things that still behave like it is 2015. The reason I tried this one is pretty practical. It supports Wi-Fi 7, it uses multiple radio bands, and it has a dedicated connection between the main router and the satellites, so your devices are not fighting that traffic as much. Wi-Fi 7, in plain terms, is about higher potential speeds at short range and better behavior when the signal is busy, especially with devices that also support Wi-Fi 7. One of the parts that matters is something called multi-link operation. That is where a compatible device can use more than one band at the same time. When it works well, it feels like fewer hiccups and faster transfers, not just a bigger number in a speed test. On the back, the Ethernet ports are a real part of the story. I am mentioning that because it affects real-life use. The main router has one 10 gigabit port for internet, another 10 gigabit port for local network, and 4 2.5 gigabit ports for local network. Each satellite has one 10 gigabit port and two 2.5 gigabit ports. I used those ports. I did not just look at them. I plugged my network-attached storage into multi-gigabit Ethernet, and I also tried a wired connection from the router to one satellite. That let me put a workstation in the room with that satellite and still have a very fast wired connection there. If you have ever tried moving a large video project or a big photo library over Wi-Fi, you know why this matters. Daily life with it started off really smooth. Setup in the Orbi app was straightforward for me. I plugged in the main router, followed the prompts, then powered up the satellites. They joined without me having to reset anything or do the little dance of moving them closer and trying again. Within the first hour, it felt great. On my Wi-Fi 7 laptop, standing near the main router, I saw wireless speeds well above 2 gigabits per second in a local transfer test. What mattered more to me is that I could fully use a 1 gigabit per second internet plan from a satellite in another room, and it still felt responsive during video calls. I tested it the way I actually live. I had a couple of 4K video streams going, someone else scrolling on a phone, and I was backing up to my network-attached storage at the same time. On older mesh systems I have used, that kind of load tends to trigger little weird moments. A stream drops in resolution, a video call gets a few seconds of robot voice, or the laptop silently flips to a slower band and never comes back until you toggle Wi-Fi. Here, early on, it stayed steady. The connection between the nodes felt solid, and devices did not seem to bounce around as much. Then the longer-term experience kicked in, and that is where I have to be honest. After a few weeks, I started seeing random drops on a couple of devices, especially an iPhone. It would look connected, then hang when loading something, and then recover if I turned Wi-Fi off and back on. I also had a satellite occasionally show a purple light, which in my experience meant it lost contact and needed attention. A reboot usually fixed it, but I do not want to be rebooting a home network like it is a hobby. Around the same time, I noticed the base unit was hot to the touch. I'm not talking about slightly warm plastic. I mean, it got hot enough that I started wondering if heat was playing a role in the stability issues. As a test, I put a small fan near it just to move air around the unit. With the extra airflow, the random reboots and the purple light incidents basically stopped. That does not prove everything, but it was a strong hint. Later on, a firmware update improved things. I also ended up with a replacement unit after talking to support, and that replacement has been stable for weeks in the same placement. So my takeaway is that stability depends a lot on firmware maturity and possibly some unit-to-unit variation. I do not say that to scare you off, but if you buy this system, I think it is realistic to expect you might need to keep an eye on updates, and you should not bury it in an enclosed space. Let me talk about range and speed in a more grounded way. Coverage is good. It can blanket a large home, but the very fast, multi-gigabit style speeds mostly live around each node. When I moved farther away, across the house through a couple of walls, throughput dropped hard compared to the close range numbers. That is normal. Higher frequency Wi-Fi does not like walls. The important part is planning. If you can place the router and satellites in more central spots with some open space, you will have a better time. If you are trying to reach a far corner through multiple walls, you should expect either lower speeds or you should plan on adding another node. The app is easy for basic stuff. I could see what was connected, I could check status, and I could do the usual network name and password changes. Where it started to frustrate me is control. I could not split the 2.4 GHz, 5 GHz, and 6 GHz bands into separate network names. Band steering is basically forced on the main network name. I understand why companies do this, because it prevents a lot of confusion, but I like being able to park certain older smart home devices on 2.4 GHz and leave everything else on the faster bands. There is a workaround using an Internet of Things network or the guest network, and you can steer that toward a specific band, but it feels clunky when what I want is simply a separate network name for each band. I also want to mention two design choices that may or may not bother you. There are no universal serial bus ports. That means no quick plug-in drive sharing and no simple printer sharing through the router. Some people never use that. I still do sometimes, and I missed it. The other thing is that even when I used a wired backhaul, the system still kept one 5 GHz radio reserved for backhaul behavior. I could not repurpose that radio for client devices. That is a choice in how this mesh is built. But if you are the kind of person who likes maximum flexibility, it can feel limiting. So where do I land on it after using it as my main network? When it is behaving, the hardware side is strong. The dedicated link between the router and satellites helps a lot with consistency, especially when multiple people are online. The Ethernet ports are genuinely useful if you have a network-attached storage box, a desktop, or anything you want wired at high speed in more than one room. Wi-Fi 7 devices near a node can be very fast, and everyday latency feels snappy for work calls and streaming. The trade-offs are real. The units are large. They run warm. Placement matters more than I expected. The software is easy in some ways and restrictive in others, especially around band control. And based on what I saw, you should treat firmware updates as part of ownership, not an optional extra. If you want a mesh system that you can set and forget for years, and you do not want to think about heat, updates, or troubleshooting, I can see this being a stressful choice. If you are comfortable keeping firmware current, giving the units room to breathe, and you want strong wired ports plus very fast Wi-Fi close to each node, I think it can fit well. If you have been using this system, or you are considering it, tell me what your experience has been, especially with stability over time and how you placed your nodes. If this video helped, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with what you want me to test next. Thank you for watching.